Hi, welcome to this lecture on several chapters in the Norton Field Guide that deal with writing and particularly argumentative writing. This is a lecture that you likely are going to want to watch again in a few weeks when it is actually time for you to begin writing. But I have chosen to go ahead and assign this reading and go over the reading prior to the research process itself because I think it will help you wrap your brain around the type of paper that you are writing when you actually are working on the research paper. Obviously, some of the things that we talk about are beneficial when you think about a literary analysis paper, but most of this deals particularly with the research paper. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing that you looked at when we were looking at the reading had to do with the purpose of writing. And I'm sure you remember some of this from earlier classes, that we write to explore our thoughts and emotions. Sometimes that's through journaling. We write to express ourselves. We write to record words and events. If you think of all of the historical documents, particularly that we have, that help us understand where our world has evolved from, and to persuade an audience. Obviously, with your research paper, you're writing an argumentative paper, and you will be attempting to persuade your audience that you have a solution or an idea to a particular problem that you're presenting. We write to identify our purpose, and all writing has a purpose. So you've got to think about what your purpose is. What do you want your audience to do, think, or feel? What does this writing task call on you to do? What is the best way to achieve your purpose? And with your research paper, you are obviously wanting to prove that there is a controversial topic out there that relates to your career choice, and you're going to pick a specific element of that conflict that you want to discuss, and you want to argue for some sort of solution to whatever that might be. When you think about writing, you've got to think about your audience, and this is particularly true with your literary analysis papers as well as your research paper. So your audience influences and drives everything you write. Without knowing who your audience is, you don't know really how to craft your paper, and we'll get into that a little bit more. Your audience must interpret what you write according to their expectations and experiences, not yours. And we're going to talk about that more in a minute. That is why tone is so important. Word choice, sentence structure, the amount of evidence that you provide. You have to remember that your audience is not you. We can't necessarily read between the lines, although we're doing a lot of that while we're reading your paper, but we need your help to guide us. In academic writing, the audience will be the professor. So in this case, you're writing to or for me. And so you need to understand exactly what is expected of you to be able to meet that expectation. You want to always identify your audience. And before I get into that, your textbook points out on page 5 something that I think is really important. It says, when you are a student, your audience is most often your teachers. So you need to be aware of their expectations and know the conventions for writing in specific academic fields. You may make statements that seem obvious to you, not realizing that your instructors may consider them assertions that must be proved with evidence of one sort or another. So that's why I said earlier, know who you're writing for and don't assume that we know exactly what you mean. We're going to be looking for you to prove your point. So you always need to identify who your audience is. Is it a known person? In other words, people who are familiar to you or who have expectations known to you. You can be your own audience, like when you're taking notes. Do you have multiple people, several levels of readers, such as supervisors who pass your messages on to their bosses? This is something something to think about when you get into the workforce if you're not there already. You understand that anything that you write can be passed down to another person. So if you're writing for multiple audiences, you've got to consider who that could be. Sometimes you're writing to an unknown audience, and this is the most difficult one because you don't really know who they are in order to know what their expectations or experiences may be. So it's always very important to think about the tone of your writing, the words that you're choosing, the sentences that you're using, because you never know who is going to read that and what lens they're going to read that through. So keep that in mind. We'll talk about that more in a minute. When you think about your audience, again, whom do you want to reach? What is your audience's background? What are their interests? Is there any demographic information you should know? What political circumstances affect their reading? When you think about your research paper, and because of the fact that you're writing about, potentially hot button topics, this is something to think about so that you are writing in a fair and just way that is not necessarily heated by the emotion behind what you're writing. What does your audience already know? What is your relationship with your audience? What does your audience need and expect from you? What kind of response do you want? How can you best appeal to your audience? That first bullet point is so important. It's always a delicate balance between what does your audience already know versus what do you need to tell them. I find this to be particularly true in a literary analysis paper. It's so hard to strike that balance between summarizing the plot versus just using the right amount of textual evidence. So you always want to think about your audience. The stance that you choose. This is chapter 4. I'm skipping chapter 3. This is going to be so important when you think about your research paper because your stance essentially becomes, in essence, your purpose statement or your thesis statement, where you are on the issue that you're arguing. It is your attitude towards your topic. So you've got to begin by identifying your stance. Are you objective, critical, curious, opinionated, passionate, indifferent? Hopefully you will strike a balance between most of those. Stance is affected by genre. If you're writing a poem, you're obviously going to perhaps be more curious, maybe even indifferent, depending on what the topic is, than say if you're writing a research paper that is an argumentative paper where you're likely to be very opinionated and passionate. So what type of paper you're writing affects your stance. Your stance is communicated through your tone. In other words, you communicate your stance through the words that you use and other ways that your text expresses an attitude towards your subject. It's very important that you choose your words carefully so that you are conveying what you really want to say. Just as you likely alter what you say depending on whether you're speaking to a boss or an instructor, a parent, a good friend, you need to make similar adjustments as a writer. It's a question of appropriateness. We behave in certain ways in various social situations, and writing is a social situation. You might sign an email to a friend with an X and an O, but you wouldn't sign an email to me with an X or an O. So again, you've got to be thinking, who is my audience? What is my stance? And your stance and your tone need to suit your purpose, your relationship to your audience in a way that you are being perceived well. When you think about stance, what is your stance? How does it relate to your purpose? Again, your purpose is to create a thesis statement that is arguable about a controversial topic related to your career choice. What is your stance going to be? How should stance be reflected in your tone? Again, the words that you choose. How is stance likely to be received by your audience? If it's really controversial, how are you going to make that more palatable to your audience? Should you openly reveal your stance? Sometimes you might need to hold your cards close to you. When you write in an academic context, and that would be this class, it's important to keep some things in mind. There are several key features of academic writing. First of all, you need to demonstrate that you have carefully considered your subject. And that also goes for your literary analysis papers. You need a clear, appropriately qualified thesis statement. Again, that would be the research paper or the literary analysis papers. In the case of the research paper, you need to have a response to what others say about your topic. You need good reasons supported by evidence. You need to acknowledge that there are multiple perspectives. We'll talk about that more when we get into the argument reading chapter. You need carefully documented sources, a confident, authoritative stance, an indication of why your topic matters, careful attention to correctness. When you think about academic rhetorical situations, what genre does this assignment require? What do you see as your instructor's purpose for the assignment? What is your purpose as the writer, apart from fulfilling my expectations? Think about who your audience is, as we've said. How can you convey a confident, authoritative stance? What media are available, permitted, and appropriate? That has already been discussed as far as the types of sources you are expected to use. What design issues need to be considered? All of these things come into play when you think about writing either your literary analysis paper or your argumentative research paper. So we're going to spend some time talking about arguing a position. Because, as I've said before, not everyone is comfortable arguing. And so it really requires a different mindset when you get into writing an argumentative paper. Some people really like to argue and need to get a handle on how they actually approach an argument paper so that they are fair and balanced. This is Chapter 10. Key features of arguments include a clear and arguable thesis. And it has to be a claim that people can disagree with. This is actually discussed in more detail with the brainstorming lecture that will help you generate a topic for your paper. But you'll know you have a good thesis statement when it's something that somebody could disagree with you about. Just keep in mind that no one is going to disagree with you if you say something like, the sky is blue. People are not going to have a different opinion. So it's got to, they're not going to have a different opinion. So it's got to be an arguable thesis. In an argumentative paper, you need to present necessary background information so that we understand, what's been going on and why we should be invested in your topic. That's where you're drawing us in with that background information. We need good reasons. Your position alone isn't going to make the argument. You're going to have to give us good reasons to back up your position. So keep that in mind as you're writing. We need convincing evidence. Once you've given us reasons for your position, then we need you to give us facts and statistics and expert testimony, case studies, textual evidence, all of these things to prove why your reasons are good. We need you to appeal to the reader's values. If you are an effective arguer, you're going to want to appeal to your reader's values and emotions. That shows that you know that we're invested in what you're trying to show us or prove to us. You need a trustworthy tone. Your argument can either stand or fall on the way you are perceived by your reader. So to be trusted, you've got to win our trust by demonstrating that you know what you talk about, and by also demonstrating a good, honest, warm tone. It's very easy to want to get haughty and frustrated with what you might be arguing, but the more you are unbiased and fair, the more trustworthy you will be. In doing that, you are always going to need to give careful consideration of other positions. I mentioned this earlier, but in a previous lecture, but you will be addressing what the opposite side thinks. Again, because it's a thesis that can be argued with a different opinion, it's going to be very important that you demonstrate what that different opinion is. So no matter how reasonable we are when arguing a position, others are going to disagree with us. So we've got to demonstrate that we see that side, and it's okay to refute it. It's okay to say why you disagree, but at the very least, you have to show there is another side. When you think about choosing your topic, you want to choose a topic that interests you. And this is why I've chosen to make your research paper about something in your career. You want to have a focused topic, but it can't be too narrow. And there's more to that when you actually do the brainstorming lecture that will help you generate a topic. Again, personal connection to your life. That's why I've chosen that your paper be about your career choice. You want to frame your topic as a problem, hence the reason I have asked you to write about something controversial in your career field. Choose one issue to write about. And when you do the brainstorming lecture and actually generate a topic, you'll see that I take you down a myriad of topics related to education that are very controversial. But in the end, I only choose one. When you think about the rhetorical situation, remember, what is your purpose? Who is your audience? What is your stance? You can start by thinking about what you already know about the issue and then begin to do some research. Explore the issue strategically. Think about it just as a definition. Can you define the issue? And then can you classify it with other issues? Can you compare it to those other issues? And then what is the process of that issue? Where has it been? Where is it going? Should we, and when you think about the process, think how can we fix this problem? What is the answer to that? Reconsider whether the issue can be argued. This is really important. Don't get too invested in your research before you really ask yourself, is there an opposite side to this? Because it has to be. You have to have an opposing side. Draft your thesis statement. Qualify your thesis statement. Develop your reasons and your support. Make sure you're looking at the other side, the other positions. Acknowledge them and refute them. Now, I'm getting ahead of myself here because we're going to go into this much more in depth as you get towards the writing process. But I do want you to at least have an idea of where your paper is going. There are different ways that you can organize your research paper, and I'm only pointing this out to you so that, again, you have an idea of what your paper will look like. I think that helps you in the research process. So, reasons to support your argument, followed by opposing arguments. So you could provide background and state your thesis, give your first, second, and third reasons with support, then have a section where you acknowledge and refute the opposing argument, and then have a call for action, restate your thesis, or give a statement of the implications of what happens if something doesn't change. But what I want you to see there is that you've got your reasons, you've got your support, and then you've got your acknowledgement of the other side and your refutation of the other side's points. Then some sort of a conclusion. Now, there are other ways to organize it. You could introduce the issue, provide background, state your thesis, and then you could do this as more of a point 1, point 2, point 3. So you could give your first reason and support, and then go in and discuss the opposing side. Give your second reason, and then go in and discuss the opposing side. And you could even do that a second and third time. And then end with a call for action, restate your thesis, and give a statement again of the implications of what happens if we don't change. So the point is, what I want you to see here as you consider your research is that not only are you presenting your reasons and your support for your opinion, but you are always going to have to acknowledge the other side and then refute their claim. In other words, disagree with it, disprove it. When you think about writing your draft, these are things that we will look at. You'll have your background information, any key terms we need to know, explain your position. Draft an ending. Summarize your main points. Call for your action. Frame your argument by referring back to your introduction. And then come up with a title. Finishing your argument essay, we will be proofreading. We will be peer editing. You will be revising. All of these things we will talk about later as we get further into the process. I don't want you to be too overwhelmed by this because I will be going much more in depth as we get to the writing process, but I do want you to just be familiar with where you're going, as I said. All right, chapter 33, when you think about arguing, this chapter is so helpful in how you actually set up an argument paper. And we will go over this more in depth later as well. But as you are researching, you need to think about this. When you are researching, you come into, writing your paper, actually, your argument paper, you will be making claims. Claims are good arguments, and they're based on arguable claims, statements that reasonable people may disagree about, but there are certain kinds of statements that cannot be argued. Verifiable statements of fact are one of them, like you can't argue that the earth is round. Issues of faith or belief cannot be argued, because by definition, matters of faith cannot be proven or refuted. And matters of simple opinion and personal taste cannot really be argued. So you want to be mindful of that. Now, if you do want to use a claim as you're writing your paper, you can qualify your claim. Now, so this is kind of getting around it in ways. So can it be true in some circumstances but not in others? Can it be true only under certain conditions, or can it be true for some groups but not others? That kind of goes back to my statement, the sky is blue. Well, it's not always blue. So somebody really could probably argue that. Don't know how far you would get or what the point would be, but I'm trying to get you to see that there are some verifiable statements that you can argue if you qualify it. When you think about arguing logically, and by the way, let me point out to you that on page 325 in your text, there are some really good words there that can help you if you need to qualify a claim. Sometimes, rarely, often, routinely, things like that. All right, so when you think about arguing logically, you obviously are going to start with your thesis statement. That is your position statement, where it is very clear that you stand on a side of an issue that has at least one other side. You will be given your reasons that support your thesis. You will be providing facts. These are ideas that are proven true. Many times these are observations, they are research. If your audience accepts the facts you present, then that can make you a very powerful argumentative writer. Statistics are numerical data that you find in research and surveys and polls. Sometimes they're relevant to your argument, depending on what you're arguing. You can support yourself with examples, specific instances that illustrate just a general statement that you're trying to make. You can look to an authority who would be an expert on your subject. Now, for this to be helpful, your authority has to be reputable, trustworthy, and qualified to address the subject. So, before you claim an authority, you need to make sure that they really are an authority. You can use anecdotes, which tend to be a little bit more laid back, narratives that come from personal experience or the experiences of others. So an anecdote can help you perhaps have a little bit more of an approachable tone in your paper. You can use scenarios that are more like hypothetical situations when you are coming up with examples. Case studies are detailed reporting on a subject. They are typically in-depth, so they can be very useful. Textual evidence, when you think about especially your literary analysis papers, but these would be things like quotes and paraphrased and summarized evidence. Visuals, you won't necessarily be needing that on this particular paper, but that is something that helps you argue. And then again, appropriate evidence. And again, remember, the kind of evidence that you choose depends on the type of paper that you're writing. And the kind of evidence that you choose helps you develop your stance and your tone in your paper. You want to convince your readers that you are trustworthy. And to do this, you've got to build common ground. So, in other words, there's got to be some value that your audience and you share. Pointing that out can help gain trust. As I've said, acknowledging that there are other viewpoints, everyone wants to be heard. So if your reader disagrees with you, they are going to be more likely to listen to you if they believe that you have seen their side as well. You want to accommodate other viewpoints, and by that I mean you may be tempted to ignore them just because you don't agree with them. But the truth is that you're going to demonstrate you are more trustworthy if you are aware of them and show that you are aware of them and show that they have some merit. You gain trust by refuting their point, though, and you will be doing that in this paper. So what is it about their idea that's flawed or that has some problem that doesn't work? The last thing that we're going to go over with in terms of writing and drafting an argument is that you have to look at different fallacies that are sort of traps that you fall into as a writer that make you less trustworthy and make you less believable. And in this case, there are several. Ad hominem are arguments that attack character. You want to be careful about that. When you get really heated into controversial topic, it's easy to attack the other person's character. Please don't do that. Avoid bandwagon appeals. So don't argue that just because everybody else is doing it, we should too. That's not very believable. Don't beg the question, because that's a circular argument. It assumes that, you're trying to prove something, but you're getting us to affirm the action, and that's not fair. Somebody can have a different opinion, and that is okay. Please avoid either or arguments, rather. Don't oversimplify the problem. Avoid false analogies. Don't compare things that resemble each other in some ways, but not in the most important respect. Be careful of faulty casualty. In other words, this for that. The straw man. Be careful of arguments that misrepresent an opposing position to make it ridiculous or extreme and thus easy to refute. In other words, don't try to break it down. Please avoid hasty generalizations and avoid slippery slopes. For more discussion of these things, you can refer to pages 338 to 340 in your textbook. These will also be discussed more in depth when we actually get to the writing process. That's one of the reasons why I'm not spending a lot of time on them, because there's a more in-depth lecture later. But at least it helps you in the research process to know what you want to avoid when you're getting your evidence. One last thing that I will say to you is it is important to at some point think about emotional appeals. Many successful arguments do include emotional components, but you want to use them sparingly because people do not want to feel like they're being emotionally manipulated. So keep that in mind as you are looking for your evidence. So again, let me just conclude by saying that there are many components of this lecture that will be addressed more in depth later as we approach the writing process, but this is meant to give you an overview so that you know what you're looking for or not looking for during the research process. As always, good luck and let me know what help you need.